What's up, guys? 2-1 day yesterday, so another winning day. We'll take it. Michigan State, nice, no sweat, easy winner there. The basketball game, what did I have? The Brooklyn Nets. They were hanging around at least, and then they wound up kind of backdooring it, but they got there. That was a cover. Not an outright win, but a cover. We'll take it. And then Texas Tech, I don't know what happened, man. I absolutely don't understand how NC State did that last night. It was just like, I mean, you can look at the stats in that game. There was a huge free throw discrepancy on the side of NC State, but also Texas Tech had a pretty bad shooting performance. It was just kind of an outlier of a shooting performance, just undershooting more than you would expect. Pop Isaacs, who's one of the best players on Texas Tech, had a really bad shooting night. That went down. Yeah, just unfortunate. Hate it. I absolutely hate it, really. It hurts my bracket as well, but the professional, that was a pros versus Joes game. I mean, NC State was one of those trendy underdogs, and so was the Duquesne BYU game. Both of those wound up losing outright, which is crazy, really. Those pros versus Joes are usually fairly strong situations or fairly strong plays to make there. Man, like going against these trendy underdogs. Fading McNeese did get there. That was I didn't play those games, but I only played the Texas Tech and Michigan State. But yeah, the Fading McNeese got there, the trendy underdog, and there is one today in James Madison, who I think is too trendy as well. Where that one, I like Wisconsin, and that was close to being a play for me with Wisconsin, having faced the much more difficult schedule, and Wisconsin playing a better defense in a slower pace game. Wisconsin, for a slow team, actually plays very efficient offensively as well. So both of those teams are balanced. It's just Wisconsin is better, I think, on both ends than James Madison is, even though James Madison is pretty good. But James Madison likes to run up-tempo, and Wisconsin, I think, is probably going to be able to succeed in slowing the game down enough to their pace to where they'll be able to do that one and get out of there. What else was I going to say? Well, my bracket is kind of injured right now as I lost 2 Elite Eight. I mean, this is what you do, and you go like leverage bracket, game theory bracket, and you take these teams that are you think have a decent chance to get to a certain point, but are being underpicked. So I had BYU and Texas Tech both in the Elite Eights. I went 13-3 yesterday. Got like all the coin flip games right, but then those two hurt, losing Elite Eight. And Texas Tech, the path was completely clear for them, man, with Kentucky getting upset by Oakland. Congratulations to Oakland with the big upset of the tournament, although the BYU Duquesne one was pretty big as well. That was 9.5-point upset. The Kentucky one was a 13-point upset. Congratulations to Oakland there. That would have cleared the path for Texas Tech to get into the Sweet 16, probably with a fair amount of ease, which sucks because that was going to happen for my bracket. We'll see what happens. As far as my bracket is concerned, I don't even know at this point. I'm a little bit out of it, man. I don't know. What else was I going to say? I was going to say something else about the bracket probably, but yeah, I mean, BYU, I don't know what happened in that game either. And they made a huge comeback. Duquesne, they're bad offensively, but they're also not able to hold on to leads. We've seen them blow big leads in their last 2 games now against VCU and BYU. And BYU came all the way back and tied the game with a couple of minutes left. And at that point, you're like, all right, BYU's got all the momentum now. They're just going to wind up escaping with the win. No, and they still didn't do it. They still lost. That is just awful. And then what else was there? Oh, I think, Kansas really had an escape there. They blew a giant lead. They had a 21-point lead in the second half or something. Blew the whole thing. Samford got to within 1. Samford team not going away there. And Samford, they got screwed, I would say, really. They had a play where Kansas was able to break their full court pressure pretty easily and make these passes down court. They did that one more time, and they had, I don't even know who their player was who had it, but he was able to get, it might have been Furphy, man, I don't even know who it was, but he had the press broken, got to the rim. Samford made this amazing play. This was in the final seconds of the game with a 1-point Kansas lead. The Samford player got behind him and absolutely clean blocked from behind. Just one of the best plays that you will see. and they called it a foul because the refs called it a foul because, of course, Kansas gets all the calls, and that that really changed the game because you would have, if that's a clean block, you have Samford with basically the final possession down one with a chance to win the game with any bucket that they make and having a lot of momentum there, where instead you give Kansas 2 free throws. They hit both of them, and Samford not able to get it done. So, and I have Gonzaga beating Kansas in my bracket, so it would have helped a little bit if Kansas was just gone. So we'll see what happens with that one. And yeah, so hopefully, Gonzaga is the favorite over Kansas, so hopefully they'll be able to do it, but I'm not confident because Gonzaga looked so good yesterday, and Kansas looked very, very beatable, which usually that translates into the opposite happening in the next round. So it might even be a play on Kansas, which would be, I might have to do it, but I don't know. We'll see what I come up with tomorrow, but that doesn't look good for my bracket either. And then I'm kind of mad. I almost took Oregon to beat Creighton in this next round tomorrow, and I didn't quite do it. Creighton is the favorite, of course. They're power rated way better than Oregon, but Oregon, they just have a ton of momentum right now. That Oregon team, I don't know where that team was for most of the year. They got guys, a couple of those guys might be NBA players. Dante, that guy, he is a presence, man. He's insane. He was posterizing people yesterday. I did get that pick. I got that one right in my bracket. I was always going to pick Oregon over the very overrated South Carolina team, but I just wasn't sure how far to have them go in my bracket. And I initially was going to have them go all the way to the Elite Eight because there was this value taking a team other than Tennessee or Creighton to get to that Elite Eight spot there. And I wound up with Texas there. And that's looking like the worst of the two plays there. Although Texas did look so ugly yesterday that maybe that'll be a good play anyway, but we'll see. They're a bigger underdog against Tennessee than Oregon is against Creighton. The Oregon-Creighton game looks like a much more winnable game. That just feels like it's probably going to happen, the Oregon over Creighton, and the way the initial line move went on that one, I don't know, it just feels like Oregon's going to continue a run there, and I wish I continued it in my bracket, which I almost did. Probably should have just left it the way that it was on Monday, because I also would have had Marquette filling that other Elite Eight spot where I wound up with Texas Tech, but Texas Tech should have won that game and gotten there. All right, enough bracket talk. Well, so let's talk about college basketball. I'm skipping the NBA card today, by the way. I don't like the NBA card very much at all. You do have the one game where there's a big road trip returns, Minnesota returning from a road trip. Minnesota's not returning from a road trip either. They returned from a road trip and played against the Nuggets in their last game and lost. The T-Wolves lost that game, but that's such a tough game that I don't think it's that bounce back scenario where a lot of times you'll see a team just play a really bad game in their first game back from a road trip, and then they'll be in a bounce back spot in the second game back. But I don't know if that's the case with Minnesota because they played so tough against Denver. I don't really know if I want to do it and actually go against them. Cleveland Cavs are off a loss, but a close loss in a return home spot against the Heat, where now they're going back out on the road again. So maybe a little bit of a better spot for Cleveland there, but I'm still not going to be able to do it. I don't know if there's anything else to really comment on in the NBA, really, but that's probably about it. Going to college basketball, though, I'll be on 2 more games today. One game is which game is up first? I'll talk about whichever game is up first on the schedule here, and that is Colorado in the afternoon slate today, plus 1.5 on Colorado. This is a situation where we had a situation like this yesterday that didn't come to fruition with Colorado State, but those Mountain West teams, man, I don't know. Obviously, I had Texas beating them in my bracket, but those Mountain West teams, I just don't really love them. And it was a situation where Colorado State had looked pretty good in just a blowout of Virginia, although nobody thinks Virginia's that good, but I was hesitant to play that one. This Colorado one I like more. And both of these teams are in a situation where they're coming off a play-in game, the first 4, and a lot of the recreational guys will look at those playing games and think, well, the playing game means that team is a worse team for one thing, but it also means that team is going to be at a disadvantage because they had to play a game 2 days ago. They have less rest and they had to travel. So this being a travel between Dayton and where is this game? I don't even know where this game is. Maybe I should have looked. This game is in South Regional. Where do we got here? This game is in Indianapolis. So that's actually a really close trip between Dayton and Indianapolis. So that's even closer than the trip that Colorado State was making yesterday. So Dayton to Indianapolis, that's like that's almost like a bus trip, basically. So that is not a lot of travel. So I don't think the travel is going to be that much of a is going to have that much of an effect there for Colorado. So I like this Colorado team. Colorado, they're getting an underdog price here, maybe for all those reasons. But the other reason why I think the team that played the play-in is at an advantage actually is because they've already played what's technically a tournament game already, so they already have that under their belt. So if there's any like nervousness, if there's any like adjustments to make, having to adjust to that first game in the tournament, well, Colorado already played a game in the tournament, so they already have a little, and they already won, and they won ugly, and it was. So all of that makes me want Colorado because they won and they didn't look good in a win. It was a low scoring, just ugly game. They beat Boise State, but that's kind of the way that those two teams tend to play a little. Boise State especially kind of uglies up a game. So I think that game was even more to Boise's pace than Colorado's a little bit. Neither of those teams play fast, really, I don't think. But Colorado was able to get it done. They looked ugly, man. But they have that game under their belt. So I think that actually helps a team. And you see every year one of those playing games into the 10 or the 11 seeds or whatever it is wins. And I think almost every single year one of those teams has won, and it hasn't happened yet. And that's not a reason to play on a team. But like I said, there is reasoning behind playing on these playing teams because they already have that first game under their belt, so they'll be like maybe potentially less nervous and already have kind of like that built-in chemistry a little bit. And with Colorado, I think it's even more helpful because Colorado played all the way up into their Pac-12 final. They lost the final, of course, to Oregon in a close game. So I think getting that win under their belt after that, I think is also like a more of a like new momentum starter where I'd like them less if they were coming into this off of that loss in the conference final, really, because now they get a win under their belt as well, start some new momentum, carry that forward. So I like that aspect of this for Colorado, whereas Florida is not in that situation. Florida, they lost their conference final to Auburn. And not only did they lose, although this is going to be factored into the line, they lost, but they also lost Hangloten. I don't know how to pronounce his name. They're 7-foot big man. Really, really horrendous looking leg injury. As I mentioned in one of my other videos, just very, very unfortunate because this Florida team has been playing some good basketball. They looked like they were primed to maybe be one of those teams where if they get through the first game that they have to play, they could potentially be like a threat to like make a little bit of a run there. But now I'm saying that I'm not so sure that that's the case anymore, even though they do have really good guards. They're a good team, but they also, neither of these teams are used to playing in the tournament. I think it's been a little while for both of these teams as far as making the tournament is concerned. So neither of these teams has that much of an edge there with like tournament experience. So both of these teams are going to be at kind of a disadvantage there. But Florida does have good guard play. They do have a really good offense, that's for sure, which is why the public probably likes Florida a bit more than Colorado. Colorado plays an uglier style. Florida can score, man, and that's why the public's going to like that Florida team. But not having that big man in the middle there, that's going to be a problem, I think, against a Colorado team that does play. They like to kind of play a paint presence game to some extent, and they have a big guy, man. They have he's not that tall. I think he's probably like 6'9" or something. I forget what the hell is Lampkin? Is that his name? He is a big boy, man. That guy, Lampkin, and without Hangloten in there, that could be a problem for Florida trying to go toe-to-toe with Colorado in the paint there. So I think that's going to help Colorado because Colorado is a team that is going to be able to take advantage of Florida being down a big man like that, whereas there are some other teams that don't have the size to take advantage of that. Colorado is a team that can take advantage of that, and a team that is from another big conference, of course. So I like Colorado for a lot of those reasons, man. And then you got Florida. They're public. I mean, they have 58% of tickets, although they do have 59% of the cash right now. So I don't know what to think about that. They've flipped from a 1.5 point underdog to a 1 point favorite with juice. So the market indicators are kind of on the Florida side. They're moving them to a favorite, and with them having the cash discrepancy. So maybe, I don't know if some bettors are coming in and thinking this is an overreaction to the injury, but I'm not sure about that because I don't know how much. It's tough to quantify that injury to Florida's big man because he is one of their better players. He's not necessarily their best player because they do have some really good guards on that team and stuff too. So it's hard to quantify like how much of an effect that's going to have. But look at KenPom's rankings. KenPom has Colorado being the better team out of these two regardless, kind of, because Ken Palm doesn't take into account that a really recent injury like that. He's kind of just taking into account the season as a whole, and he still has Colorado being the better team. So I like that, and I like the fact that Colorado is the better defense, and now we're getting them at an underdog price. They are the significantly better defense. Defense is Florida's weakness, so Florida's a better offensive team, but Colorado's not that bad offensively. In KenPom, I think Florida's in like the teens in offensive efficiency. Colorado's in the 20s, so really not that much worse, and Colorado's much better defensively. I think probably in the 30s or 40s in defensive efficiency in KenPom, whereas Florida's way up in like the 80s. So Florida's one of those SEC teams, man, that they can score, but their defense is questionable. It's Florida, Kentucky, and Alabama are all kind of in that boat, although Florida is the least bad of those three defenses. But we'll see what happens with Hanglot not as well. And the SEC did not look good yesterday, man. So that's not a reason to play against the team, but they did not have a good showing in yesterday's card, really. Of course, Kentucky suffered the big upset, but of course that also had to do with I forget the guy's name already. Golke, was that his name? The guy on Oakland, who was the transfer from Hillsdale College in Michigan, staying in the state of Michigan. That guy had like 10 threes, which I think he's one of only 5 players to ever do that in an NCAA tournament game, 10 or more threes in a game. Absolutely crazy. The guy was lighting it up last night. But still, Kentucky, they really struggled, man, against a team that has paint presence. Although Kentucky's not Florida, of course, but they did not look good in that game. Mississippi State, of course, looked pretty bad against Michigan State. So I don't know. The SEC maybe has not looked that good so far in this tournament, you could say. I like Colorado, though, man, for all those reasons. I think that's the best play on the board, plus 1.5 or whatever. We'll be on Colorado. And the other game, I'm going to be honest, to fade the other conference that I think is just not performing well in this tournament, which is the Mountain West. But, of course, everybody's talking about how the Mountain West has been really bad in tournaments. Coming into this year's tournament, they were like 3-32 over the last like several years or something in tournament games. And that hasn't gotten better, man. It's only gotten worse. I think with yesterday with Nevada going down, they went down yesterday. Who else already went down? I forget. Of course, San Diego State made the huge run yesterday, but that was kind of an outlier. And I liked San Diego State yesterday. A very good defensive team, but this Mountain West team, these Mountain West teams, they play really well against each other, and they all kind of like open the season and get ranked because they all play an out-of-conference schedule that's maybe not the strongest, and they all get ranked, and then they all just kind of play each other, and then it's like, well, how good is this conference really? Maybe they're a little bit better now because of the transfer portal and stuff like that, where you see some of these better players stepping down into these because they get to play a larger role in some of these mid-majors. So, yeah, that's true, but I'm going to take TCU here. They're up from 3 to 4, laying 3.5 here. They got 59% of the cash, or 51% of tickets on the other side in Utah State. So Utah State is an 8 versus a 9, where the 9 is favored. I don't think that really matters. Of course, the seedings mean a lot less than, of course, what the power ratings guys and what the odds makers are telling you. Of course, odds makers are telling you TCU is actually the better team here, and I believe that is the case. TCU, they got tournament experience. The TCU team has been in the tournament repeatedly recently, although Utah State was in it last year too, but did not perform well yet again in a game that I thought they were going to win. They probably should have won against a team with a bad defense in Missouri, who was really all offense. Utah State really did not have a good showing at all there. But TCU, they're coached by Jamie Dixon. I prefer him more in a tournament setting as well. He has a lot of tournament experience from back in his Pitt days. He had some pretty good tournament runs there, so I like that. And TCU plays a physical style, man. They're physical and they ball press. They play up-tempo, and all of that I think is going to potentially throw Utah State out of their element. If TCU is able to control the pace here, that is not the style of game that Utah State wants to play at all, man. Mountain West, not as physical of a conference. Utah State, when they face some physical teams like San Diego State, who's probably the most physical in that conference, or one of them, they have not looked good. I think they lost both, or maybe lost 3 times to San Diego State this year, so that's not good. TCU, both of these teams are fine teams, I guess you could say. I don't know where KenPom has them ranked. He definitely has TCU ranked higher for sure. He has them ranked 35th, and I think Utah State down in the 40s. Even though he only has TCU, somehow he only has them winning this game by 1, but I'm not sure I buy that. TCU, he has them ranked 45th in offensive efficiency, 32nd in defense, and then 63rd third in tempo, and he has them as a pretty unlucky team, too, in the bottom third of luck, 296 in luck. So TCU may be better than they actually appear, and their record doesn't look that good. So that's another thing that is probably going to put some recreational guys who just kind of look at the records. Oh, Utah State has a better looking record because they're 27-6, man. And TCU 21-12. That looks ugly. And there are some teams that had TCU as one of some people, bracketologies and whatever, had TCU as one of the last teams in the tournament, to the point where maybe people are questioning if they even should be in at all, kind of like with Michigan State yesterday, which I think might even put a little bit of a chip on their shoulder. But Utah State, I mean, yeah, they play a balanced game as well, but they're 32nd in adjusted offense, 37th and 67th in adjusted defensive efficiency. So a little bit better offensively, but significantly worse defensively. So TCU, you're getting the better defense, although you are laying points, but they do play a faster, more physical style. Utah State down at 107th in adjusted tempo. So they do like to play a bit slower. They don't do well against physical pressing teams like TCU, and TCU up at 63rd in tempo. They're going to try to push the pace more than Utah State probably would want. And Utah State's also 14th in luck, according to Ken Palm. So he's basically telling you that while TCU's record is worse than maybe it should be based on how good they actually are, Utah State, their record probably looks a little bit better than it should be. So they're a little bit overrated. So we're going to go with TCU here, man. It just feels right to me, kind of like the Michigan State one yesterday. Although you got to lay points with TCU in this one, the 3.5. You can still get the 3.5s out there, but it has moved up, and it looks like a pros versus Joes situation and reading the market there. So I like TCU in this one. So that is what I'm going to do in that one. Those are going to be those two plays. And TCU, man, if they get through that game, that's probably an opponent that Purdue does not want to see, man. If you're Purdue, you're hoping that Utah State gets through. And for my bracket, because I don't have Purdue getting through this region, I have Gonzaga, which, as I mentioned, which is a really out there play, and I'm not really expecting much out of that one at this point, even though they're actually a very good offensive team, and they're power rated pretty well. Purdue, a much more balanced team, but if Purdue does run into TCU, that could be a problem for Purdue, man, because Purdue, they don't face much of that ball pressure in the Big Ten there. And if they face TCU, that is not good matchup-wise for Purdue, because TCU, like I said, they're a team that does do that. They press. They play in the Big 12, a very good conference, of course, a much better conference than the Mountain West. So they're coming out of a better conference, too. So TCU, much more battle-tested, I would say, than Utah State is. But TCU could run into that Purdue team there. TCU comes from maybe the best conference in college basketball. And we've seen Purdue not be able to handle this ball pressure in some of these tournament games before, man. It becomes a problem for them. And they couldn't even deal with it from Fairleigh Dickinson last year, a really small team. So are they going to be able to deal with it against a physical? I'm already setting up a play on TCU plus the points against Purdue. I don't know. I might actually do it if that's the matchup, but we'll see what happens there. But I don't know if they're going to be able to handle a team from a major conference, the Big 12, that also plays a physical style like that and has significantly more size than, of course, that Fairleigh Dickinson team did last year. I don't know. It's been the knock on Purdue, all those early exits. But TCU, that is not a matchup that Purdue should want to see there, or Purdue fans should want to see there, because they're a team that they have produced kryptonite, let's say, which is that really intense ball pressure. But then the other thing is, can TCU maintain that for 2 games over a 3-day period? That's the other thing. These teams that like to ball press, you've seen them be able to do it, though, with Shaka Smart, with VCU, with that huge run. So it's not like unheard of for that to happen. And with a good coach that has tournament experience, I mean, TCU put up a good game in their second game last year too. They almost were able to beat Gonzaga last year in that second round game. So we'll see what happens with that. But yeah, so TCU, maybe they won't run out of steam if they get that far, even though they play that heavy ball pressure, and they'll have to be doing it 2 games in 3 days. Let's go to the NHL to finish up. I'm finishing up with the most boring of the sports. Unfortunately, this is going to be one where I'm just throwing on a big money line underdog, man. The Washington Capitals plus 180. I'm just throwing it on the money line because I don't want to lay. Let me see. I think for the spread bet, if you want to take Washington, you got to lay minus 155 to take the puck line there, plus 1.5 goals. I don't want to lay 155 on Washington. So I'm just going to just go right for it and just throw a smaller amount on the plus 180 to win the same amount that I play to win on these other games, and just take a flyer on it. We'll see if it gets there on Washington, because I think this is a bad spot for Carolina, man. Washington, Carolina's down from 201 to 196, minus 201 to minus 196 on the money line as a road favorite, laying a huge price as a road favorite in a bad spot. So maybe we're getting a bit of value on Washington here, I would say. Carolina, 88% of the tickets, 82% of the cash. So they're public, of course. Everybody knows that they're a better team. The cash discrepancy is kind of going against them here. But Washington, a little bit under the radar, man. And the record's not that bad. And they're fighting to get into a playoff spot, man. That's the thing here. Like, I think Washington's going to be the team that has a lot more motivation here because they are just out of the last wild card. They're out by 3 points right now of that last wild card spot. It's the Islanders and the Devils have both been playing so poorly that they've kind of fallen off, and now Washington is ahead of both of those teams by 2 and 3 points, and they're only behind the Red Wings by 3 points. So they have a shot at taking this final wild card. It looks like Tampa Bay is pretty likely to maintain the top one of the 2 wild cards, but Washington to get that they're still in the hunt, man, trying to get that final wild card and get into the playoffs. And Detroit has not been playing well recently either. So Washington absolutely has a shot at that. So there's motivation on Washington's side. They're going to want this, and they have a good team coming into their house. So that's going to be motivation as well. So I think in a regular season, just in the middle of the regular season, I would still like this play, but I like it even more because Washington has that extra motivation trying to get that last wild card spot, whereas Carolina in the standings, they're pretty much settled in to where they are, man. I don't know if it's possible they can catch the New York Rangers, but as far as they're going to get at least the 2 seed in the Metro. They have such a big lead for the 2 spot in the Metro. They're not going to drop lower than the 2 seed. So I think they have a little bit less motivation here. And that team that's behind them that is not going to be able to catch them is Philadelphia, and that's the team that they just beat in overtime at home. Look at Carolina's schedule, man. So they're coming off a pretty big win over Philadelphia, who's the divisional foes right behind them, although I believe these are both divisional foes. I think all these teams are in the same division, but that's a big win. Carolina's won 5 games in a row now, and most of them against good teams, too, beating Florida in a shutout. And then they went on the road, won at Toronto in a shootout. That's a big win as well, huge win. Then they didn't suffer a sandwich spot somehow against Ottawa and won that game in a blowout, 7-2. Then they went to New York to the Islanders. So not the Rangers, but the Islanders. They've kind of fallen off a little bit, but still in the wild card hunt, and they beat them too. Then they returned home. You might think that might be a little bit of a bad spot, returning home from a road trip, having played a lot of games in quick succession. They're not a well-rested team right now, and they won that game too in overtime yesterday against Philadelphia. Now they go out on the road again, not a long trip, but to play Washington on a back-to-back with no time off. And they got Toronto up next, even though they did just win at Toronto in a shootout. That's a big game, man, because that could be like a playoff preview type of game with Toronto. Toronto's got one of the better records in the Eastern Conference, a better record than Washington. So this looks like a bad spot to me, man. It's a back-to-back with travel. It's a 3rd game in 4 days, all in different cities. It's a 4th game in 6 days, all in different cities. And it's a 5th game in 7 days. And it is a 6th game in 9 days, almost all in different cities with 2 home. The first one was a home game against Florida, and then yesterday was a home game against Philadelphia. And all the other games have been in different cities. So that is crazy, man. So this is a 5th game in 7 days, all in different cities, and a 6th game in 9 days, and it is also a 7th game in 11 days. And I'm trying to do the math here, and a 9th game in 13 or 14 days. This has been a jammed schedule for Carolina, man. They've had no let up, like no ability to rest at all. So how much is this Carolina team going to have left coming into this game? This is one of the worst rest spots that I've ever seen, really. I would say Washington, they're in a much better rest spot because they've had these staggered days off for a while now. So in that entire span, this is only going to be their 4th game, I believe, in that whole span. And they're in a much better spot, I think, to bounce back because they returned from a long road trip. They went out to the Pacific Northwest, a tough road trip. They did okay on the road trip. They actually won the last 3 games on the road trip to go 3-2 on it, losing to Winnipeg and Edmonton. You can't blame them for those losses, although the Edmonton one looked pretty bad. But those are good teams. Then they beat Seattle, beat Vancouver. That's a big win. And then beat Calgary. That's a nice win, too. Then they return home, and it was a bad spot in the return home, even though it was a Toronto team that's good, so you think they might be focused on that, but they did bad, man. They lost 7-3 in that return home. Now they have a day off, and they're able to get those home distractions out of the way, do whatever they need to do at home. This is a good spot, man. It's always a positive spot when a team returned home and they had a really bad performance in that return home, like distraction spot there, because then in that second game, they're refocused now. They've put all those distractions aside. Now they're back at home. They're settled, and they tend to have much more focus in that next game. This is a Washington team fighting to get into that last wild card spot, like I said. So probably going to be big motivation and a big refocus spot for Washington here. So it's a positive spot for Washington and a negative for Carolina. So I like all of that. So I'm throwing it right there on the Washington Capitals money line plus 180. Let's get it done, man. That's one that I think has a decent chance to hit there on that money line. I mean, I always think if I'm going to play it, I think it has a decent chance, but I like that one a lot, man. Actually, I kind of wish it was a closer matchup, just because it would just feel a little bit better. But hey, you're gonna give us a huge line on a road favorite there in that ridiculous a spot. Let's take it. Let's take Washington plus 180. So Washington Capitals plus 180 in the NHL, and then in the NCAA tournament, Colorado plus 1.5 and TCU minus 3.5. That's going to do it for me, man. Let's keep winning. March Madness, baby. Peace.